Let's take a little bit of time, first of all, to feel good. Very important as we practice that we cultivate feeling good. So consider your own life, perhaps things that you've done in this past week that you feel happy about. Consider choices you've made, things you've said, maybe even ways you've seen things about which you feel proud or happy or joyful. Could be anything at all, even just as simple as that you've shown up. You've tuned in today and that you are practicing right now. Feel good. And having done that, turn your attention towards body sensations. In particular, noticing what it feels like as you sit here. If you're alone, or if you have others with you, notice how that feels in your body. And pay particular attention to the aspect of change and vanishing. Notice if anything that you feel falls away, in whole or in part. So as you attend to feelings, pay particular attention to change, to any flowing or changing quality to experience, and pay attention to any time anything drops off or falls away or ends in experience. Staying with this moment of bodily experience and feeling what you feel, noticing if it's changing, and attending to the moment at which it drops away. there's a lot of feeling happening, if it's changing a lot, and allow that sense of change to massage, remove awareness. There's not a lot of change, then allow that to stabilize awareness. And if there's not much going on at all, then just appreciate that tranquility. One form of changing feelings that is available as long as we're alive is the breath. We're breathing, we can experience the breath flowing, changing as it fills our body with each inhale, and as it leaves with each exhale. So, nice to see you all. At least see some of you. This week, we will continue with investigation of the Samannaphala Sutra, the text on the fruits of the holy life. As we continue with this, we're now in part of the text where the king has asked various people about fruit of the holy life, about what the point of this is, and they have all answered by giving their doctrine. The king has been saying, "I'm not so interested in this." Each time one of these people has responded. He keeps on asking, "What's the point?" And all these people keep on giving doctrines, views, not really answering his question. And it's frustrating. Uh, we, in the modern world, are, of course, in a similar position. We also are asking a question with our lives, asking, what do I do about this? Or maybe even just asking, how should I see this? And again, for many of us in the modern world, we're becoming disenchanted with the answers that have been given. A lot of people try to answer this question, and we aren't all that interested in much of this anymore. People more and more aren't buying into any of the stories that we tell. More and more, there's this sense that none of these stories are true, that none of them are accurate, that none of them really address the most important things in the world. And because of this, there's a deep hunger. There's a great hunger for meaning. There's a hunger for meaning that's given a sense of urgency because we see at the same time that we need an answer. And the world is falling apart, and we have to have some way to respond, and we don't see a way to respond. It's so interesting if you talk to people who are very young, they have a clear sense that the world is in trouble, that the world that they're going to grow up in is not going to be a pleasant one. It isn't, in all likelihood, going to be one that is enjoyable, is fair, is compassionate. And these same people seem to not be interested in any way of seeing things. I feel like each way of seeing things is just not all that interesting. We see attendance in churches, for example, dropping. It's been dropping for a while. We also see belief in other doctrines, systems, ways of seeing the world falling off as well. So today, I'd like to take a look at another one of these views. Take a look at a different way that one can miss, different way that grab onto a view that doesn't, in the end, further. A different way you could say that we could be confused. And this view, this doctrine, is, well, I'll just go through it. So it's the doctrine of a teacher named Pakudha Kachayana in the text. And it goes like this. So the king asks this guy, what's the point of this? What's the fruit of the holy life? And he responds by saying, great king, there are 7 bodies that are unmade, unfashioned, uncreated, without a creator, barren, stable as a mountain peak, standing firm like a pillar. They do not alter, do not change, do not obstruct one another. They are incapable of causing one another either pleasure or pain, or both pleasure and pain. What are the 7? The body of earth, the body of water, the body of fire, the body of air, pleasure, pain, and the soul is the 7th. Among these there is no killer, nor one who causes killing, no hearer, nor one who causes hearing, no cognizer, nor one who causes cognition. If someone were to cut off another person's head with a sharp sword, they would not be taking the other's life. The sword merely passes through the space between the 7 bodies. So this, a little bit strange as it's presented here. It's, of course, unfamiliar. It's an unfamiliar context. It's different culture. But the view is basically the view of eternalism. It's a view that there is something that lasts forever, and that that is in fact what you are. The view that there is an eternal soul, that that soul uh, outlasts the body, and in fact lasts forever, never dies. It was very interesting here. We've just seen another person say that there isn't anything like this. There's no eternal soul. When we get to the end of our life, that's the end. You die and that's it. You are your body and your mind, and when death comes, nothing remains. So it's easy for us to think, if we're being simplistic about this, to think that the Buddha, by rejecting that, must believe the opposite. Must believe that there is something that lasts beyond death, that lasts forever. And yet, this too is not the case. The Buddha is not going to make this claim, and the king, in fact, wasn't satisfied with this claim. Again, he said this wasn't answering the question. So this claim of eternalism, of there is a soul, is one that is, I think, commonly attributed to the Abrahamic religions, to Christianity, Judaism, Islam, the view that you have this eternal soul that's going to outlive your life and then never die. And it's taken to be the case often that you just have to realize that that soul is already there, and then you're done. Or it's taken to be the case that there is rebirth, for example. There's a lot of the time in the way that people talk about these traditions, there is a sense, well, you have rebirth exactly once. You die and then you go to either one of heaven or hell, and then that's the end of it. You die, and then if you were good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell, and then nothing else happens. I think that this is actually a bit of a misunderstanding of the message of the Abrahamic traditions, but it is one that's quite common. It's one that people often take on and live their lives according to. In much the same way as people who practice science, who believe very strongly in the scientific method, or just in the idea of science, tend to take on annihilationist, materialist views. People and tend to take on eternalist views. But it's actually interesting here. The next line, I don't know if any of you read the text, but the line right after this view, King Ajatasattu explains, he says how people responded to him. So in this case it says, so for example, in the prior case, he said he asked this particular philosopher about the fruit of the holy life. The philosopher explained in response this doctrine of annihilation. But here, it's sort of weird. He says, when I asked Pakuda Kachayana about a visible fruit of recluseship, of the holy life, he answered me in a completely irrelevant way. Now, I am not an expert on the Pali language. Definitely, to sort of like, there isn't a way to compare my level of expertise in Pali with that of Bhikkhu Bodhi's, the guy who translated this. It's, to make the comparison would imply too much about, it would suggest that I have too much understanding of Pali to try to make that comparison. To say that I understand less, or even much less, or even much, much less than him would sort of imply, still, because he's there in the comparison, it sort of implies too much. So I don't know what the original here meant, but there is a different translation of this text into English that actually is quite interesting. So Thanisaro Bhikkhu translates the same line saying he answered with non-relatedness. And I think that's really interesting. And in fact, if you look at the original text, the Pali version, you see that there is, so I don't know what the word means, but there is a word that shows up here that is translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi as answered in a completely irrelevant way, and is translated by Thanisaro as non-relatedness. And that word is the same one that shows up in the view itself. It's the same one that shows up as this person is talking about how these bodies that are unmade, unfashioned, uncreated, don't alter, change, or obstruct each other. They don't relate to each other. There isn't a relationship between them. They just are eternal, everlasting, not impacted by each other or by anything. I think what he's saying here is that this is a doctrine of a lack of relation. It's a doctrine of an absence of relatedness. That you have the view that what you really are, that your soul, that your identity is somehow fundamentally not connected with, not related to anyone else or anything else, that it lasts forever, that it will never change. And I have a sense that we actually, so part of the reason that I think this shows up so often in contexts that permit it, that make it easy to go in that direction, that make it easy to take on that view, is that we really want that. We really want to not be related to anything that we don't like, to anything different from us. We really want to be, isolated from people who disagree with us, people who we find boring or frustrating or we think are wrong. We really want that. And in fact, from nature as well. Spend some time outside and we say, it's so nice to be outside, but you spend too long outside, more than a few hours. Maybe it gets dark or it starts raining or something. Soon enough, you say, you know what? I don't actually want to be outside anymore. The water is relating with me and I don't enjoy that. Or the snow is relating with me, or the sun maybe is relating with me. It's beating down on me. It's very hot. So we escape into non-relation, which I think is at least part of why the current salient crisis, not the biggest crisis, but the most salient crisis, this pandemic, has been treated in the way that it has. I think it's part of why the response has been what it has been. We really like the idea in a way of just stopping all this relation. I feel like there's all this relation going on, and we shouldn't do that. It's actually quite nice. You can just sit in your room and engage only with what you want to engage with. There's no problem. And you see people on the internet saying this. There's no problem with, what are you complaining about? You have to watch Netflix for a couple of months. Grow up. And sort of like, come on, this is what everyone wants. Just be non-related. Don't relate with anything. It's what you were trying to do before. Just do that more. As opposed to, for example, emphasizing people building their immune systems by exercising, by getting out into the fresh air, by going out into nature, by spending time far away from our isolated little worlds, go out into the countryside or something. there hasn't been nearly as much of an emphasis on things like that. There hasn't been nearly as much of an emphasis on exercising, on preparing in other ways to weather this sort of situation, uh, as there has been on just shutting down all relationship. So we, seeing it in that way, can maybe sympathize. We can understand. We can have a sense, okay, it's true. I do kind of believe that there is this eternal soul. There's me, and when other people interact with me and I don't like that, then that's a problem, and I should solve it by not interacting with those people anymore. It often feels, uh, again, terrifying to have to interact with other people, uh, especially people who disagree with us. Which, by the way, I think is really interesting. I mentioned this recently. We tend to feel really safe when we're around people who agree with us. We tend to feel really safe when we're around people who espouse the same doctrine that we espouse. So if someone is saying, how do you feel about this? And we think that the way to relate to this is also by feeling that that's the correct way anyway to relate to this. We feel safe. If someone is saying, well, good news, you aren't really there and you don't really matter, there's only atoms and molecules at the end of the day, and we also believe that, we feel safe. Interesting that we feel safe in that situation. I think it's actually quite illustrative. We feel safe when someone is standing in front of us and saying, for example, ethics don't matter because the universe is going to end. You don't have to be ethical because the sun is going to become a red giant in 5 billion years, and then sometime after that, there will be a heat death of the universe, and therefore nothing we do matters before then. Rather strange that we would feel comfortable around someone like that. Someone who is saying, I don't believe that there's any reason to behave ethically. Rather strange that we would feel safe at a time like that. And I think that the reason that we feel safe in those situations is actually that we often are so identified with the views that we hold that when the views are safe, we feel safe. Because that's what is safe in that situation. You're talking to someone else who is agreeing with you, saying the same view as you're saying, you physically aren't that safe. First of all, there's a big, scary person in front of you, and second of all, they're saying that they don't believe in ethics. You're much more safe alone, somewhere else. But the view is safe. The story is safe. And the story is not in danger of being threatened at that time because it's being reinforced, it's being shared and spread. And so if we make such a full identification with these views, then we ourselves can believe in that situation that we're safe. But again, so as is the case, I think, with the rest of the sort of modern religions, there's a seed of truth here. There's something beneficial here. There is something useful here. There's something that we legitimately want to protect here. In the case of materialism, I think that that thing is a particular understanding of causality. There is a way of exploring, of investigating, that has borne a lot of fruit and is of great benefit in certain ways to certain extents. And here, there often can be, problems that come if we take this view that we have an eternal soul. But there's something beneficial in the teaching of the Abrahamic faiths. in that it's saying, for example, you're going to go to heaven or hell after you die because of what you do during this lifetime. But it's saying that there's such a thing as morality, making the claim that there's such a thing as ethics, there's such a thing as right and wrong, and they aren't merely your feelings, they aren't merely your opinion about what right and wrong are. That you can believe you're doing the right thing, but that isn't what matters. What matters is that according to God, you're doing the right thing. That's the important part. And again, I hope that as we question and go beyond the mistakes that we've made and the mistaken views that we've taken on, we don't also throw the baby out with the bathwater. Throw out the sense that there is such a thing as ethics that is beyond mere human conceptualization, mere human feelings, mere human thinking. And in the case of this in particular, this view of eternalism, I actually wanted to share something that I've encountered in the Christian faith that I actually find quite interesting on this topic. So there's a certain person in the Christian tradition who I personally find very inspiring, who I've been deeply moved by, whose life and works and writing have resonated, have hit home, have landed in my heart. And this person doesn't seem to be talking about eternalism when he talks about Christianity. So this is a person by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Maybe some of you have heard of him. See my mom nodding, so it's no surprise, I guess, but still surprising. Kind of weird, but anyway. It's weird. It's weird that we keep. These are not. Well, you know how it is. You have parents. Some of you may have children. You keep finding these weird correspondences. You say, "Wait, you know about that? I know that I know about that, but you know about that. What? It's why? Whoa." But anyway, so Dietrich Bonhoeffer was, as far as I can tell, a fairly standardly educated Christian preacher and theologian. He's not someone who you read his life story and then there's the part where he went to a Zen monastery for a year and you're like, okay, that's talking like that. When he was 14 years old, he was going to be a Lutheran minister. And then he dedicated his life sincerely and wholeheartedly to that, to Christianity as Christianity. And if you read his writing, he is entirely Christian. You know, he's not one of these people trying to, like I maybe am trying to do, or sometimes try to do, trying to unify the faiths, or find the common ground, or what is the thing that everyone's saying, what's the essential truth. None of that. He's just Christian the whole way through. And it's interesting about his life. The reason that I think people often talk about him and know about him is that he practiced during the Nazi regime in Germany in the 1930s and 40s. So when true Christianity was outlawed, when the church was, more or less turned into an appendage of Nazism, he persisted in teaching Christianity. He ran and taught an underground seminary in Germany during the period leading up to to World War II, and in fact was captured by the Nazis and died in a concentration camp as a result of the things that he did during that time. So he's written a lot that's very moving. Strongly recommend reading what he's written. But one thing in particular, he wrote at some point a poem. This was in I think the months maybe even leading up to his death. This was in any case right before he died and when he knew that it was the end. He, you have the sense that he wasn't so much like, I'm going to write my big impressive poem that explains my understanding of everything. He didn't have that sort of personality or anything like that. It was more like, well, this is what I got. I'm going to die. Here's what I got. Better to have it written down and shared than not. He wasn't particularly impressed with it, but he did write this description of the path. It's a way of talking about the path of Christianity. It's talking about what you do as a Christian, how you practice, how you should lead your life as a Christian. And it's interesting too, we won't really get into it today, but it mirrors the structure of this text in many ways. Not the current section on the views, but once you get into the Buddha's answer to this question, it's actually more or less the same order through, which I find quite interesting. It begins, for example, with discipline, talking about how you should live your life and how you should use effort and discipline to bring your life into alignment. We won't get into it now, but talks about discipline, then he talks about action, talking about going into the activity, doing deeds, doing work, and not merely thinking about things or writing them down, but actually taking risks, which he demonstrated with his life. He didn't have to die in concentration camp. He could have easily, in fact, stayed in America. He was in America at the time, and he could have just weathered the war there, but instead he got on the last ship going back to Germany in 1939 to return when he saw that things were going in the direction that they were. But the very last section, there's 4 sections, and the very last one is entitled Death. It's called Death. This is the work, by the way, is called Stations on the Road to Freedom. So the very last section of this, the culmination of the path, the final stage, the final station, is, first of all, entitled Death, which is already interesting. There are others, but it reads in this translation, "Come now, thou greatest of feasts, on the journey to freedom eternal. Death, cast aside all the burdensome chains and demolish the walls of our temporal body, the walls of our souls that are blinded, so that at last we may see that which here remains hidden. Freedom, how long have we sought thee in discipline, action, and suffering? Dying, we may now behold thee revealed in the Lord." So he says here, the second line is very interesting. It says, "Death, cast aside all the burdensome chains," talking about demolishing the walls of our temporal body and the walls of our souls that are blinded. So this is very interesting. So they're really, well, got myself into it. There are really 2 ways of seeing this. You can see this as talking about physical death or not. Either he's talking about physical death, about what happens at the end of your actual physical existence, the breakup of the body, or he is talking about something else. Death is a metaphor that he's employing. So if he's talking metaphorically, then this, as far as I can tell, is a description of at the very least, kensho, of initial awakening, of a breakthrough of time and space, of escaping from body and mind, escaping from anything that you could point to and call me, or mine, or my soul, or my body, anything like that. And if not, if he's talking about physical death, then this is a teaching of impermanence. He's saying that the same thing that happens to our temporal body, our walls are demolished, happens to the walls of our soul as well. The same way that you could talk about this body breaking up, your soul breaks up. That is the road to freedom. So I just wanted to give a sense that you don't have to buy into an eternalist doctrine in order to practice Christianity, and in fact, in order to be an exemplar, a quintessential Christian. So again, I often say this these days, I'm not all that interested in converting anyone. My goal here is not to convert anyone really to anything. I don't want you to become Buddhists or rationalists or even Christians. I just want you to become you. I don't care what you believe as long as it's true. I don't feel like I have a monopoly on that. I don't feel like I have the whole story. So I'm just interested in us as we grow together, finding out what's true. We grow together as we explore in community, in practice, and in practice in relationship, most significantly. That we come alive, that we become more ourselves, and that we ultimately die. Because this principle of non-relatedness is really kind of sad. It's a boring world. Nothing happens that is unexpected. I mean, maybe some of us are feeling this. We've been cooped up inside for a little while, and we don't have very much novelty in our lives. You know, we never planned that. We never said, I'm going to stay inside and now I'm not going to have anything unexpected happen to me. But because we are living in the world of planning, nothing unexpected can get in. That kind of insight, that brilliance that hits us, that comes from nowhere, that comes from maybe someone who says something that we wouldn't have considered otherwise, shakes us out of our patterns. The practice of non-relatedness disables that. It interferes with that, makes it harder to get that. So, of course, we may do that out of concern, out of interest in public health, may do that for a little while, and yet we should at the same time be aware of the cost. We should notice the toll it's taking and notice what's missing so that we can structure our lives so that relationship is more the default. This is part of why Soryu and I both say so emphatically that you should move into a community. Move into a place where there are other people, ideally people who disagree with you, who don't think the same things that you think, people who you find annoying, troublesome. Go and live with those people And do it now before the next pandemic hits and you're isolated again. Make that change in your life. Make the plan to stop having a plan. Make the plan to have your plan disrupted. Make the arrangements to not have everything be about your arrangements. Make arrangements to be in relationship. Make arrangements to do the kind of work, not just that you plan on, that you think you should do, but that you don't plan on, and that you don't think you should do. In my own experience, that work is where this happens. That work in relationship, that work that we don't expect, that we don't even believe in, that we don't think we want to do, that is the work that causes the deepest kind of growth. So, thanks for listening again. We continue through this desert of views. We plod on through this text, and let's now take a little bit of time again to practice together. And take a moment now to check in again with your posture, your body, your breath. And we'll continue to explore change, continuing with this theme of change and vanishing. We attend directly to the body. The experience is unplanned. Even if we have a sense, an idea of what's happening in the body, if we look more closely, we see that it's actually not what we had expected. That our experience is changing, is going away moment by moment. Even with our breath, we may be controlling our breathing, we may be aware of how the breath is going to go. And yet, as we look closer, we see that the breath is actually moving outside of that plan, is moving outside of that idea. Noticing as well, anytime any part of experience vanishes, It's possible that as we do this practice, there can be a sense of fear, uncertainty. If so, then just recycle that into the practice. As we look more closely at that fear, see if it's changing. See if any part of it is lessening or falling away. And in fact, whatever reaction arises, observe how that reaction changes and watch for that reaction to drop off or fall away, either in whole or in part. And if you like, you're welcome to even broaden the focus to include other sensory phenomena, stories, ideas, sights and sounds in the world. Just watch them in their changing aspect and watch for them to vanish. Noticing as well if there's any sense of anyone doing this, of anyone watching experience change and fall away. Watching as that also changes and falls away. Again, any reaction that comes up, any sense of impatience, annoyance, or of joy, excitement, fun, just recycle all of that into the technique. Recycle all of that into this practice of attending to change and vanishing. This vanishing, that change, is a kind of energy. We can practice riding on it so that more and more our actions, our words are carried by it. If you like, if this inclines in the direction of movement, and if you're able to move where you are, then feel free to explore that, letting yourself be moved by this energy. Again, continuing to recycle everything that happens into the technique. We now have a little bit of time for discussion, questions, comments, anything at all.
Does anyone else see other videos off? It might be on Pam's end.
Yeah, it looks like we may still have video here and something wrong with the pipes. So it goes. Thanks for mentioning it.
An observation. It's, yeah, I found it maybe slightly more difficult to notice when things end, which is when I get in. So when I notice something begins, I realize, oh, the previous moment is ended. But the previous moment is gone.
Yeah, Shinzen says that our attention generally inclines towards what's coming into experience. That tends to grab us. And so I'm constantly pulled towards that. And we don't so easily notice when something falls off of experience. But as he says, every time anything falls away, and as you've said, every time something is arising, something else is falling away. So with this technique, you get to tune into that. So cultivate an awareness that includes passing away as well as rising, so that you experience full spectrum of experience.
It seems I want to come to like delusion or an illusion of permanence when one isn't aware of things falling. Yeah. Things falling away.
Yeah, often it feels like we're aware of things arising, but by the way, can everyone hear Alice? Sort of. So Alice is saying that it seems like you naturally go towards arising, not passing away, and that it seems like if you aren't attending to passing away, then you don't. It's possible that you can have an illusion of permanence. So that is the case as far as I've observed, and it's also the case that our attention goes towards arising, but it goes towards what's already arisen. So something arises, and then our attention comes towards it as it's manifesting. We miss both the very end and the very beginning of it. And so another thing that this technique can do is orient us towards the beginning, the moment of arising before we know what something is, before we have a sense of it.
So,
Josh.
Alex,
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I
Go
just
ahead.
wanted to say that's often my experience. I really have not gotten gone very much. It's been just a tricky thing for me to find. And I find that I even find the arisings after they're already there, just as Joshin just said. And so to do this technique this way gave me a little bit more insight to the arising than I had been able to actually get, to actually find those arisings and passings. And it just builds that being able to sense that, like anything else, that's always there. It's just acclimatizing just to sensing it. So I'm just saying I have the same sense you just explained. Thank you.
Great.
I just have a new question.
Well, first, Richard, if you'd like to go as well.
I don't know if this is related or not, but I just had a very significant experience with breathing
Mm-hmm.
where I was very drowsy to begin with
Mm-hmm.
because it's springtime in Ohio
Mm-hmm.
and mowing the lawn.
Mm-hmm.
And so drowsy and very clogged,
Mm-hmm.
and then had a very significant sinus episode.
Mm-hmm.
Came back and then was in this like experience of like water on top of grass because of flooding,
Mm.
but the grass being like filaments
Mm-hmm.
under the water, and then turned into this really cool feeling of feeling the breath go into my nose and really feeling the nasal cavity, like actually being in a actually being in a nasal cavity,
Mm-hmm.
which was very, very red. But that as I took breath in and took the wonderful, cool, fresh air in, there was a pinkness to it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's just extremely, and I'm much more alert now as a result. So I guess there's some going on there. And anyway, very, very nice.
Yeah, it's a good, I think it's your report is a good demonstration of this creativity that you bring to the practice. You know, there's always, it's like you're relating to this and seeing it and then seeing it in a new way. And then again and again, you know, watching how it changes and how your awareness of it changes. So really nice to hear.
Thank you.
So is it a coincidence that unrelatedness and eternalism were presented in the same view?
So is it a coincidence that non-relatedness and eternalism were presented the same view? Good question. I have a sense that so the view isn't really called eternalism in the scripture. It's just called non-relatedness. But it is interesting that non-relatedness and eternalism cash out to the same thing in a way. But it is interesting. It's sort of the kind of ultimate goal of, you know, certain brand of rationality is to live forever, get frozen and then reanimated and then live to the end of the universe. And I've myself wanted that at times. It is interesting. I don't know. I don't have an explanation, but it may be that there are similar tendencies at play, and suggested that there are similar tendencies at play that draw us towards both of these. You know, that draw us towards the desire to be protected and safe forever, and the desire to see it as the case that we outlast our death, that we live forever in the form of a soul.
It's like there's a sense that the desire to be there's the desire to be unchangeable, and then there still seems to be a sense that like relationships change you, or you change in relationships. So
Yeah, right.
you don't want to be related to it, so then you don't change.
Yeah. 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 So it is interesting.
I guess I just have an observation.
Mm-hmm.
During the sit, I felt like, I was doing my practice of equanimous. And I felt like during it, I was listening to you. I heard you talking. But then having a bell and coming back and talking about coming and going, I don't remember any of that being said. I'm kind of like confused. I guess I missed that whole thing. The only thing I can remember is if you feel something, recycle that into your practice. And I don't know if that's because, I tried something new with my sitting and I was like, whoa, this is not it. So my leg was so numb. So I'm just like, I remember hearing that and being like, okay, the equanimous, this is temporary, But the whole time still, I felt like I was listening to you, but I have no recollection of any of what was said except for that one sentence.
Yeah, it is interesting. So it's sort of, you're listening and you have the sense, I'm listening, I'm hearing, and then you look back and there's nothing, you can't recall anything that I said.
No,
It was just the one sentence.
just that one sentence.
Yeah, great. So that can happen as we're doing a technique and as we're staying with it, and we have sufficient degree of concentration. It's as though we stop grabbing onto the words that are happening. And so they're still happening, they're sense phenomena, but they aren't sticking in the same way. And then it can also happen, that you yourself, in talking, can have that experience. And that can be very fun. You say things and then you're just kind of going by how people are looking at you for whether it makes sense or not. And people keep on affirming and agreeing and being interested, and so you trust that.
Keep going.
And you keep going. You find that you don't need to know either what someone's saying or even what you're saying. Shinzen also talks about that a lot. You'll hear him go on about that auto speak in his language. So great. Sometimes, of course, you want to grab on and tighten up.
Right.
Sometimes it's, you have to pay attention to the content.
Right.
But, it's good to.
How do you know if you're in a space of not grabbing onto it? I felt like I thought I was grabbing onto it until it was done.
Yeah,
I
right.
I wasn't grabbing onto it. Or I didn't grab onto it, I guess.
Yeah, right.
So can you recognize that in the midst of it happening, that I'm not grabbing onto it? I hear it, but I'm not grabbing onto it? Or?
Yeah, I haven't. It's a good question. The only thing that I've found how to recognize whether you're grabbing onto it or not is just repeated trial and error. You keep on doing it, and then you start to build a sense up of paying attention, I'm not paying attention. Or this is the kind of situation in which I'm not going to be paying attention. And and of course, you can always reflect back. You can say, well, did I hear the last minute or so? Actually, it's interesting. I've noticed that we, at least I, tend to like doing this as I've been exploring, using the internet during the quarantine. It's like I'll often put on like an episode of something, some sort of podcast or something in the background as I'm doing something else. And then I'll completely miss everything that's said, even though I feel like I'm paying attention to it. And then sometimes I'm like, well, I want to actually pay attention to this and understand what this person's saying so I can take it in and hear it. But I actually think that maybe part of it is that we like the experience of not grabbing on to audio stimulus. People say all sorts of things about it, like that it's a way of feeling as though we're with someone else. That's why people like soap operas, like in retirement homes and such. But I think part of it too is that we like that feeling of equanimity, that feeling of something happening that we don't have to grab onto, even though it isn't always maybe productive or helpful. It's pleasant, and it can be, in certain situations, very helpful.
So me saying equanimous while you're talking is probably not the best thing if I want to be tuned in.
If you want to be listening to the meaning, maybe not. But it is interesting that you did hear the one thing that you needed to hear.
Right.
So maybe not. There's some evidence that your wisdom in that way is not malfunctioning.
Okay.
So, yeah, thank you. Very good. Anything else?
I'll chime in a minute.
Mm.
I've enjoyed everything. And at the last thing that was just spoken about, sitting with Shinzen many times, he'll sometimes ask us to listen with our belly button. And I like that because then I don't have to try to understand everything that he's saying. And I just get grabbed by something. But I can't space out when I do that because then I won't be grabbed by it. So I've liked that a lot. Sometimes I'll put things on in the background and trust myself that I'll be grabbed by something and then I'll pay attention. Which is my way of thanking you for planting that word about being trustworthy and trusting, because that really stuck last week. And I've been using that as a in my talk space, just saying that to myself a lot in the middle of difficult situations, that I can trust myself, and it changes my physiology and my mind, and I find that I can where I might have thought I couldn't. And in particular, the way you framed it today, my work situation is going and living 40 hours a week or 30 hours a week with people with different opinions and views than me. And especially during the pandemic, because we're in healthcare. And I'm really seeing the benefit of it. It's kind of fun now because it's great that several people have different views than I do and that I don't have to impose myself on them. And I can still decide where my safety boundaries are. And if I need to make a change, then I make it myself. Or if I need to ask them to do something differently, I do. It's really good. So I thank you and the group for that.
Yeah, wonderful to hear. There's a lot in there.
There is. It is. And I now appreciate that there are people going out and socializing, and they're taking that on themselves. And that's giving us a lot of data now so that we can make better assumptions or recommendations or just self-assessments of what risk we want to take. And I might not have noticed that unless I was pointed every Saturday to what my views are. So thank you.
Yeah, great to hear. Yeah, I really appreciate that, and listening with the belly button as well. It's nice. Bring that in. Yeah. And just, again, it's just very helpful, everything that you said, to see how it's received and how it's coming to life. Is really helpful. And then to see the reflection back that you bring, really appreciate it.
So I've had an interesting experience recently, just in my own practice, that kind of relates to the vanishings thing, and so I just kind of wanted to bring it up and ask how maybe through a Shinzenian lens you would look at this. So in my practice in general, I think the thing that worked the best for me early on was like see rest, and I would see visuals come and go, something arise and then dissolve, and that was the most striking thing for me. And it's always striking, but when it first started happening, it was like very interesting, and I'd never experienced anything like that before. And then one day, this is in the past, like maybe months ago, not that far past. I was interacting with my kids, and I was really tired and short-tempered and trying to get them to bed and having a bit of a rough time. And in those moments, I would tend to like snap at them, and that's obviously not something that I want to do, and it's something that I've always wanted to work on. Because they just want to read a story or something. And so what happened once was, instead of snapping outside of the body, I snapped internally. Not like a mental break, but I heard the voice of what I would have said express itself, and then it went away. It was gone. And that was like, I was astonished at that. And that to me was the first sign, like, this actually affects, like, sitting down and meditating actually does something, to improve your life. And so that kind of made me very committed. Something happened recently where, so those types of things don't happen all the time, but when they do, I notice them. And just this past week, I was sitting down. I had increased my meditation regimen, and I sat down, not meditating. I just sat there, but I sat down on a cushion, and maybe that primed me. But I was just like doing something, and I got this impulse to talk to my daughter in a positive way. I wanted to like share something with her. But instead of, and I was gonna like jump up, like I'm sitting where I was sitting at that time right now.
Yeah.
Wanted to get up and share something with her. So I just like literally like, this is what I wanted to do. But I did it and saw it all internally. And I felt like I moved. I saw myself move, but I was still sitting down on the cushion. That all happened in, I don't know, a half second or something like that. And that again was another like astonishing thing to me. And then later I did literally the same thing, but I sat with it to just kind of think about what had just happened. But I never come across anything in kind of reading in things I've read Shinzen say, or in other spiritual practice. I've never read about this. I've never seen anyone talk about this, but it can't be unique to me. So I'm wondering, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so the way that I would tend to think about this, which I don't know if this is orthodox Shinzen or what, but it's just kind of how it would land for me, is that first of all, so in Shinzen system, we break things down into out and in. And we say that we focus on objective experience or subjective experience. So we can focus on our own thoughts, images, emotional body sensations, or we can focus on external sight, sound, and touch. And we often have the sense that these are very clearly separated spaces, that things are clearly happening in one or clearly happening in the other. But actually, as we pay closer attention, what we think of as out is actually a kind of tangle or web of out and in. And so when in has sufficient equanimity and concentration and clarity, it's possible for things that you used to think were out to reveal themselves as in. You discover, oh, okay, that the sense of where space is and where I am is something that I'm actually constructing. And if I just let go of it for a little bit, it can shift and change on its own. In the same way, if you go into deep meditation practice, you can start to get to the point where any sense of where you're sitting, even of who you are and what your body is just forgotten. You may have even encountered this. You may have been sitting there and suddenly you don't remember who you are, where you are, what you look like.
That hasn't happened yet, but
yeah, sorry?
That hasn't happened to me yet. But
okay, yeah, well, give it time. So it's actually really surprising. You know, we just have this sense that my body is this shape and I'm here in this location, but that's actually all just because we're having a certain experience. And when that experience drops off, we stop having that sense. There isn't anything else there. So to have it shift like that, which I have a sense is what you're describing, correct me if I'm wrong, to have that really visceral experience of getting up and you feel like you're moving and you see yourself moving and all of that.
Yep.
It's pointing in that same direction. It's showing this sort of way that you're constructing the world that you live in. You're seeing the more of the extent to which your experience is a construction. It's put together. So that's just what comes to mind, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, no, thanks.
Yeah. And then as well to just have it's very fun when you get to the point where that falls off, where the sense of who I am and where I am goes away, where you can drop that. And then there's the point where you can drop that while you're moving around in space. And that is very fun. That is, it's hard to describe how fun that is because there isn't a way to understand it without experiencing it.
Okay, well, I look forward to something like that one day then. Thanks.
Great. So I think we have time for maybe one more brief share, or else we'll transition. Good. So as you can see, everyone is now off of retreat, so there are more people here. There's also Zev, who's off camera and manning the technology this time. You can appreciate these heroes going on their internal journey and doing this in relationship. And again, also appreciate yourselves and each other. I'm really grateful that you show up and bring what you bring to this. feel, it's nice to feel connected with you. And keep it going. Have fun. See you next week.